Welcome to the Higher Ed Happy Hour podcast, brought to you by UNINCORPORATED, a higher education agency committed to building awareness and growing enrollment for universities. This podcast provides deans, senior admin, and faculty with the tools, resources, and information they need to grow student interest, design branded content, and launch new programs and courses. In today's episode, we're featuring a talk that UNINCORPORATED's founder and CEO, Ian Evenstar, recently gave at the Unibuddy Summit. In his talk titled Mental Health Matters, Ian discusses adapting to a new normal, practical ways you can improve your mental well-being, and why institutions need to be proactive in providing resources and support for their staff.
It's a super important issue. Starting first just with some of the facts or big detail here. More than 50% of us, right, we're going to be diagnosed with some mental illness or disorder. So it's a significant issue that's touching all of us individually, as well as our families, our communities, our work environments, our institutions. And I, too, suffer from mental health. Poor mental health is something that's been in my family for generations. And it's something I just wanted to say right up front, because of the fact that there is still this lingering stigma around mental health, poor mental health, and of course, mental illness and severe cases of mental illness. I grew up very poor, and my mom was actually a mental health counselor. She raised me, single mom, raising her son, moving around a lot. And so I heard a lot of stories growing up about poor mental health and like the stresses that she was feeling at work, as well as some of the horrors and impacts of mental illness and poor mental health that she was dealing with at work and within the family she supported. So it led me to really study a lot of different philosophies, ranging from Zen Buddhism to Kabbalah to Freemasonry to Hermeticism. I also took a very keen interest in the sciences of Jung and Freud. And that has helped, I'm one of the fortunate ones. It's lifted me up in many ways. But still, Kevin, as you know, living is freaking hard, right? There's a physical, a mental, emotional, spiritual aspect of our lives. And living is very, very challenging. And that stigma still also lingers. My vision has been to found an ideal agency. That means to me that I care very much for this team. This is the A team who supports me in the work that we do for universities and colleges. For those of you who don't know or didn't read my bio, so we run a branding agency dedicated to higher ed with the mission that we want everyone to access and ascend in life through education. So we help programs, deans, administrators launch programs and recruit students, like many of you in the room. But I tell you, there's not a day that doesn't go by where I'm not thinking of my team, right? This is how I see them, enjoying life in the moment. Like this is the goal, that this is the state of being that I want everyone to be in, to be the best, absolute best versions of themselves, including myself, right? And so how can I be the best version? How can I help them be the best version of themselves without first working on that same mission internally or individually? I also teach. I'm a faculty member, proud faculty member at Cal State LA. And this is a screen grab from one of the classes last semester. And so here too, I asked myself, how am I showing up for these students? As we know, the safe haven of classrooms, that was wiped clean for the last year and a half. And so these students ended up in sometimes toxic environments at home where, that safe space of the classroom was eliminated. Personally, I've seen an increase in dropouts, students signing up or enrolling in my class and then dropping out without any notice. I've also have seen an uptick in students coming to my office hours and opening up and like crying, having emotional breakdowns. Just the outpour of emotions. And I care about these students deeply, and yet I'm still suffering with these things as well. So it's manageable, A lot of us are managing our mental health and certainly coping day to day in the new norm, but it could lead to more severe illnesses like drugs and alcohol addiction, eating disorders. It leads to dementia later in life, maybe even Alzheimer's or suicidal thoughts, God forbid. In fact, 1 in 5 Americans, and I know there's some international audience here, but 1 in 5 Americans are actually experiencing mental illness, severe mental illness every year. And it's in all things, right? We see it in students, in our kids, in our families, in our spouses, our partners. We see it in our employees. We see it in ourselves. It's everywhere. And not only is it so pervasive, but when I found this stat, I was shocked. Some new research has linked poor mental health and mental illness to 90% of the conditions like cancer, diabetes, heart disease. So these toxic stresses that we're living with, not only can it lead to these, severe ailments, but it also has the ability to impact your genes and take your genes to actually pass on to your children, right? So there's a longevity to mental illness and poor mental health as well. It could go through generations. So one of the books that I included in my research, there's a slide too of the appendix of all the resources if people want to study a little bit more or learn more about it. That's from Dr. Emma Hepburn. She also runs a great Instagram channel, but she has this intro in her book about, because really it comes down to like, why are we all suffering? We know it's bad. We can see the severity of it, but what's beneath the surface there? And she talks about how modern life is busy. We're trying to find this balance, impossible balance. I love the way she puts that, between work and home. We're trying to keep people happy. Think of our students, our bosses, our colleagues, our kids, trying to people please across the board while also still searching for our own happiness, our own quest and search for meaning. We have to stress out about our finances, look after our children, search for body positivity. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. And what I would add to this is that there are culprits, a couple of villains in the room. One of them is our culture, right? Especially, I would say in international audiences, you see this possibly even more, definitely in well-developed countries and communities, but overseas, there's even more of a stigma. And that culture, that get ahead, work hard, crunch culture mentality is really putting a lot of extra pressure on all of us. There's also technology. This is both, a beauty and a curse, a gift and a curse. With our phones now, like we're always on, we're always expected to respond to that email ASAP, get back on the text. Why did it take you a couple hours to return my text message? And then there's these expectations like within the business environments or work environments or institutional environments where we're expected to be constantly producing, constantly being on, and constantly giving that sense of wellness and well-being. If that wasn't bad enough, layer onto that the trauma of COVID, this collective loss that we've all felt. We're still feeling these ripple effects. We want to have a sense of certainty, like what's going to happen next fall. Am I on campus? Am I off campus? We want to feel and be better, but at the same time, things are still very disrupted. We're kind of like living in these extremes, right? There's a return to normalcy, and there's the battling up against the fact that, well, you're going home, you're in the extreme now of working from home and trying to deliver course curriculum or recruit students from your home office with the dishes and the kids and all the other stresses. And to now, okay, everybody's back on campus, or there's a hybrid version. And we have, in many cases, I know from our clients' perspective, a lot of administrators, staff, faculty, they don't have a say in any of this. And we talked about this, Kevin, right? That there's this push to return, and yet we don't really have any say on how we return, just an expectation that we do it properly. We do it to the best that we can. Plus, higher ed, man, higher ed is under the gun. Higher ed has been scrutinized, continuing to be the bad guy, right? People are calling for the disruption or the unbundling of higher education. I hear a lot that the value isn't there, right? And this is just adding more and more stress to all of us as staff and administrators, because we kind of internalize, we are the object of that critique and the attack. And so there's a lot going on, not just globally, culturally, but also I think specific to higher ed. Mm-hmm. And, one thing I know for sure is like, we're all tapped in terms of resources. I love this from Dr. Emma's Instagram. And she talks about the capacity cup, and we're just like overwhelmed. I wish I was there at the bottom. I've got all the spare time in the world. The truth of it is more initiatives, more programs, more, higher numbers in enrollment. Maybe our enrollments have dipped, and now we actually have to somehow find the capacity to not feel overwhelmed, to still get everything in our job done and completed. But then we're asked to actually be delivering at a higher level and doing more. So our capacity cup is completely overrun during this time as well.
I have a quick question regarding that too. And you're probably going to answer this, I know, a little later on in the presentation, but I think this is something that's on people's mind is how do you juggle all of that thing? Because especially a lot of us who are higher ed professionals, we, especially during certain parts of the admission cycle, and also certain parts of the year, if we're not in the recruitment part of the institution, we have a lot of things that get stacked up on us, as you mentioned. So how do people manage all of that and prioritize all of that while also prioritizing their own well-being?
Yeah. I mean, it's a little bit of $1 million question, right? If there was one thing we could do to across the board, single-handedly say, these are the priorities, this is what I'm going to focus on, and then have the buy-in from other stakeholders like our boss or the dean, then, I would probably be prescribing that. To me, it comes down to self-care. So is what is being asked of you impacting your wellness, your mental health and wellness? And if you're being asked to do too much, and you're starting to see the signs in other areas of your life, like, again, poor eating, because it crops up in the physical world, drinking too much, maybe watching too much TV, like doing types of escape, then it's time to bring some awareness and have that tough conversation with your boss, right? And that is a form of self-care, being able to say no. And I do have a slide later that talks about the different ways you could do self-care, but it's a great question. And it's, in some ways, it also almost causes more stress. Like, I really need to address this. These expectations are unrealistic. They're toxic. And so how do you best prepare yourself to have those conversations with your boss and take care of yourself? The other way I would answer that is, luckily, right, it's not all bad news out there. Luckily, there's awareness. Last month, in fact, was Mental Health Awareness. So people are, bringing this conversation up more and more. You see this in today's topic, right, is a good example of that. We're starting to understand more and more that mental health affects the way we think, feel, and act. So if, again, as an employer, I'm thinking about my A team, not only for their benefit, keeping them well, but also because I know it's going to help with productivity. It will help with how they deliver product. If you're in, student services or curriculum development or curriculum delivery, if you can be happier, then that's going to ultimately help your faculty feel good, deliver a better experience for the students. It will help the students feel better about themselves and their education. And then that word of mouth will actually help the top line revenue. So there is some business application to this as well. It's not just kind of, Eastern philosophy gone too far. So I think awareness is a big part of it. I think still understanding what mental health is and isn't is an important thing. So maybe a conversation with your boss, like, hey, I'm overrun. And you might think Chris Voss does a great, and I would recommend this to anyone trying to do like negotiate out of a toxic work environment or negotiate out of a set of list of demands or expectations that are unrealistic. Go and take the master class, Chris Voss. It's not in my slide deck, but I'll just throw it out there. He does an excellent job on preparing you with the words and the frameworks on how to have those tough conversations. One thing he says is you could do an accusation audit, such as going into that conversation, you might predict that your boss will see this conversation as a sign of weakness. So you can start the conversation with, hey, you might think that I'm being weak right now, right? You might feel that I'm capable of doing this and meeting your expectations, but truth is I'm suffering, the work is suffering, student experience is suffering. And so how can we work on this together? So understanding what mental health is and isn't, and maybe broaching that subject or that conversation with a bit of like an audit up front, just to kind of air out these stigmas.
Can you kind of, for folks who don't know who Chris Voss is, can you kind of explain what his background is for folks?
Oh, yeah. Man, he is incredible. He has an incredible story. He wrote Never Split the Difference. He's a former FBI hostage negotiator. One of the biggest, like you talk about high stakes negotiation, it doesn't get any more high stakes than negotiating life and death around hostage situations. A lot of the tactics and the frameworks that he deployed during, I think it was the first Iraq war and later with confrontations with the Taliban, a lot of his frameworks actually brought home safely many hostages that were being held at gunpoint and threatened with their lives. And he's applied it now to businesses. And I love teaching it in class, giving the students. It's also a great thing for employees to understand like how to negotiate salary, or in this case, how to better negotiate proper work expectations.
Right.
But yeah, he's certainly someone to look into. As this illustration shows, in the past, a lot of people saw mental health as mental illness, but that's not the case, right? It's a spectrum between mental illness and mental well-being, and mental health is that spectrum. So you can ask yourself, where do I kind of fall on that? A good question, if anybody's taking notes or wants to jot down this question for themselves right now, it's a hypothetical, so no pressure. But how are you letting yourself down on that spectrum, right? Are you feeling unmotivated? Do you have a sense of remorse or anxiety over not feeling motivated enough? Are you breaking commitments? Maybe, in the severe cases, adultery, or maybe in the worst cases, like little white lies. But are you breaking commitments to yourself or to others? Do you see bad habits developing? Do you feel like you're not as productive as you should? Again, some of this is through the lens of culture and technology and business environments. Or maybe you're simply not, and I hear this a lot too, is maybe you're just not carving out enough time for yourself. So the places where you're letting yourself down on that spectrum are contributing to that mental health, those mental health issues that we've talked about. Leads to anxiety. This just to give anybody who's jotting down an answer there, how am I letting myself down? Oh, obsessive behaviors. I'm feeling irritable. I'm working too hard. I'm losing sleep. So it's got me thinking, Kevin, and all this research and all these studies, like what are the root causes? We've talked about some of the higher level causes, but what are the root causes? So CDC, they have some good literature on this. They point out that there's actually no single cause for poor mental health or mental illness. There are, of course, a number of factors, life experiences, traumas, such as sexual assault, witnessing violence, history of abuse. There's some ongoing issues like maybe poor medical condition, or possibly something as bad as cancer, diabetes. As we talked about earlier too, like we can pass on in our genes stress and toxicity. So there's some biological factors here, like genes or chemical imbalances in the brain. The use of alcohol and drugs, obviously, those are contributing factors. Another great resource is Man's Search for Meaning Viktor Frankl. And he talks about having a sense of connection with people like loved ones. So having very few friends or very few connections can lead to that sense of loneliness or isolation. And those are more of the internal causes. I've kind of broken them down. I've simplified them in my mind, at least, around these three things: triggers, trauma, and toxicity. Mm-hmm. So for example, I might have a stressful meeting at the end of the day, which might trigger my desire to go out and have a drink or binge eat that bag of chips or that pint of ice cream that's sitting there in my freezer. Maybe I'm not meeting my goals of the department. Maybe I'm not hitting my enrollment numbers, or maybe I haven't brought in the level of endowments needed for our advancement goals. And, that's creating a bit of trauma, right? And mm-hmm. those feelings and thoughts of inadequacies, those are going to lead to further triggers, trauma, and the whole thing just becomes very, very toxic.
Yeah.
23 minutes in, our goal is to figure out how to unwire some of this toxicity, right?
Right. And you made me think of how some people are, even experiencing generational trauma. You did kind of bring that up, either from certain things that happen in their family and how that's carried on, or even, sometimes the violence people face, either that's racially motivated or based on their personhood. Other ways as well can sometimes carry from generation to generation. And then having that even compounded in the workplace with the way that our structures are in place as well too. So those are some of the things that I also see as well when talking about this. I'm wondering with any of your clients, what kind of tools have you given them to address all of these different kinds of traumas that people might be experiencing on an individual level that would affect the way that they work, but mm-hmm. also not just for them as an individual, but also within their office place as well? Like, what kind of tools do you give leadership? And I know that's coming up, but maybe you could tease it a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that we do at the agency, and I think it's an applicable model for classroom settings, it's an applicable model for departmental settings, so office environments, is to have like a safe space during the week. We call it Wonderful Wednesday. And it's an opportunity to come together, share ideas such as like implicit bias, perhaps, or some of these racial, generational traumas that are existing in society, but no one's really talking about, maybe in the media, but not so much within the workspace. So we create a safe space for that conversation to happen. And you'll see, just teasing it, foreshadowing a little bit, there's something that's called the neurocycle. And with the neurocycle, the very first step is just creating some awareness around it, just bringing it to light, putting a light on it, talking about it as objectively as possible. And that helps. And there's some evolutionary reasons in our brain of why that helps. And I'll get to that. We can think of this as Masonic, Freemasonry. The philosophy of Freemason talks about the point within the circle. So we can imagine ourselves as this center spirit, or if for the scientists in the room, a collection of genes and information in our DNA collected. And then right out that side of that is our mental body, and then our emotional body, then the physical, and then of course that goes to the environmental, cosmological, and maybe even the spiritual realm if you want to go that far. But your mind, you think about this, your mind is the center, it's the point within the circle, it's the center of your story. And so these red marks, these are those triggers or those traumas that occur. Right? And just to kind of visualize this, and then they permeate outward into our emotional and physical. And this is why the effects of poor mental health are so devastating, is because it does permeate all the way out. As above, so below. So what we see on the outer shell of ourself is a reflection of what we're dealing with and grappling with on the internal level.
And would you say it's pretty much like when people look stressed? There you go. If you're stressed, it can show on you, on your person physically.
It's so true. And sometimes, more in more severe cases, it's not only shows, but it's also palpable, right? You can feel it, like in terms of your sweat glands, right? In terms of your heart rate. So you can see it, but on the individual level, it's also quite palpable. And this is actually a perfect segue, because it's like, well, why? Why am I staying up till 3 o'clock in the morning, tossing and turning over a silly meeting that I have tomorrow, right? Or a small conversation that I need to have with one of my students who is underperforming, or with my boss who has like crazy expectations, as we've talked about. And so I went back to the evolutionary model, and we have this thing called the reptilian brain. Are you hip to this? It's like the core brain sits right at the very first brain nodule on top of our brainstem. It's the reptilian brain. It's essentially the fight or flight mechanism, right? It's purely for survival. Is there a threat? And if so, do I need to confront it, or do I need to flee? And so these inputs that we're getting, or the anticipation of a meeting, they're actually triggering at the reptilian level. In other words, it's causing us moments of panic and anxiety on whether we should flee or stay and fight, which of course then goes into the mammalian brain, which is our emotional and feeling center. And very rarely do those feelings actually go finally into more of a logical analysis of the neocortex, which is where language and perception and reasoning occur. So in other words, the reason we're stressed out and we're staying up all night is because that little brain center that controls really all of our survival instincts hasn't evolved to the point where we can recognize that it's not a real threat. So what was once like essential to our survival and our evolution is now still controlling, is like at the center of our, mind control panel, really, sending us down the wrong path. And so we have to basically do tricks on how to move it away from the lizard brain or that reptilian brain and move it into the neocortex, where we can actually process it.
But Ian, how about if we are meeting with someone that acts like a saber-toothed tiger? I know some people might have a line manager or a boss or something that's similar in certain aspects of that, and that can stress some people out.
Definitely.
What do people do, when they act on those instincts?
Oh, that's such a great question. Yeah, so if a saber-toothed tiger, aka your boss, is coming at you, Chris Voss, I'm going to pull another Chris Voss card. He talks about labeling and mirroring. And one of the tactics there is simply, also, I keep a little card on my desk, by the way. This is the 7 habits of highly effective people. One is to think win-win and to understand before being understood. In other words, simply stated, if your boss is coming at you and they seem like they're angry, you simply mirror it back. Feels like you're a little upset about where we are right now in our recruitment. Yeah. That's right. And you'll go deeper and deeper and really get to the core of that saber-toothed tiger mentality, but you never insert the word I, right? So you keep it very objective. You never say like, I feel like you are attacking me, or I feel like you are super stressed out and I can't deal with that. You say feels like, or seems like, or sounds like. And what that will do is it'll move, instead of that confrontation happening one-on-one, it'll move it almost to like an object on the desk that we can now use our neocortex and now rationalize and think about. And so what it does is it moves the cognition out of the reptilian brain or the mammalian feeling brain into the neocortex by mirroring, simple mirroring, and labeling exercises that Chris Voss talks about. And also Stephen Covey talks about in 7 Habits. And with that, there's also a recommendation that maybe you've had this experience. If you're really heated, your reptilian brain and your feeling emotional brain is just on fire, and you're typing that email. Oh, and you're about to hit send. The old adage is, the more intense the emotion, the longer the response time should be. So in that situation with your boss and the saber-toothed tiger, and you tried to label it, seems like you're feeling upset over our advancement goals, or it seems like you're, really, really angry at the fact I hit send on that email, wasn't supposed to go out next week, right? If it's something small. If that doesn't work, you can say, why don't we table it for now and talk about it like in an hour from now? Is that okay? So if you can somehow move the conversation away from the moment and create some space, that's also a very effective tactic in decreasing that the toxicity in that moment.
Mm. That is something that over time I've learned that if I'm having an issue with anyone, even in personal relationships, I take my time to okay, let me think about how I'm going to address this so then we can find a solution that works for everyone involved. And that does take some time to really say, yes, I'm going to use emotion. I'm an emotional person, but I also need to understand how that emotion is going to affect the other person, how they're going to receive what I'm saying. So I totally get that.
That's true. And you just described habit 4, thinking win-win. So that's in your nature to really come out of those tough situations and say, hey, how could we all benefit from this? Mm-hmm. Or in the case of negotiation, how can we give up the least amount? No one's going to be happy with the outcome. Mm-hmm. How do we make the outcome as least impactful or least negative for all parties involved?
Absolutely.
So one thing that, talking about the stigma and culture, what's expected of us day to day is this idea of the healthy lifestyle. And Kevin, if I said, what do you think of when I say healthy lifestyle? Probably going to say diet, right? One of them. Mm-hmm. You might also talk about sleep, right? Getting the right amount of sleep. And chances are you're also going to say movement or staying active, being committed to exercise is a part of that healthy lifestyle. And hopefully by now I've demonstrated or presented the case that the other important element to this is the mental health, and having that state of mind in a healthy condition is part of the healthy lifestyle that we're all after. Unfortunately, the mind is that messy state. It's a mental mess, which does negatively impact your chances of living that healthy lifestyle. And, you see it's something like this: toxic thoughts, depression, anxiety, anxious thoughts. They're all kind of muddled. Imagine a room or a classroom, and you've taken all the desks and you've moved them all around. We wouldn't set up our classroom like that, would we? Probably not. And we certainly wouldn't want our bedroom or our living room, if we're having guests over, like that. So we manage our home so it doesn't get messy, or we manage our finances so they don't get messy, and we manage our classrooms. But for some reason, we're not managing our minds, the space, our mental space in the same way so they don't get messy. So I just want to plug Dr. Carolyn Leaf's book here, Your Mental Mess. It's a great addendum to this talk. And she lays this out perfectly, right? She demonstrates that mental mess, it might be natural. It's a totally natural thing to have a million different things bouncing around in our minds. Mm-hmm. But even though maybe it's a natural outcome, it doesn't necessarily mean we have to live with it, right? It doesn't mean that we can't take the time to do what she calls mind management. And in addition to better sleep, better eating, better exercise habits, being a better version of yourself, it also has a number of other outcomes. So she says, very, very first thing, having a difficult situation crop up at work, or maybe it's an altercation with a faculty member, or someone on the dean's cabinet doesn't like your new initiative, and it creates that immediate trigger. So she says you can use what's called the neurocycle to embrace, process, and then reconceptualize that input. So embracing it might be like, oh, I'm feeling angry here at the response that I just received based on my new initiative for this program that I'm committed to. Now, with processing would be the second step. So that simply alone moves it from reptilian brain into the neocortex. Now we can start to process it and analyze it. Is it something I have control over? If not, why am I spending so much time worrying about it? If I do, then how can I reconceptualize this as something that I can take action over and put together, a more appropriate follow-up or set of next steps. So using this neurocycle, anytime you're in a conflict or anytime you feel like you have hit the trigger or the trauma or that toxic feeling, that toxic thought is emerging, just try to embrace it first by acknowledging it, process it. What's the source of it? Is it what they said? Is it the fact that, he doesn't think it's a viable fit? Is it the fact that it was said in a room with my boss? Like really get down to the root cause of, why that trigger is happening. That's the processing, and then reconceptualize it. Is it something within or without my control, so that then I can move on? And this little cycle, instead of the opposite where we go down a rabbit hole, right? It actually has the opposite effect where it works for brain building and it helps promote this. It helps promote healthy mental cognition and actually helps change. It changes the shape of our brain over time. Neoplasticity is the scientific one there, but we'll leave that alone. So neurocycle as a way to use mind management. Once you have that tool in your toolbox, I think a very simple exercise, maybe make a T-chart, on the job, off the job, on call or downtime, uptime or downtime. And next to that list of the places you're spending your downtime, rate it, healthy or unhealthy. So just taking some inventory around how you're spending your downtime. To me, this is one of the secret messages here in today's talk, because once you've done an audit on how you're spending your downtime, and again, this could be applied to the individual, but it could also be applied to the family. It could also be applied to the classroom. It could also be applied to the work environment. How are we spending that downtime? And, just going back here to Dr. Emma again, she says, well, there's life-giving activities and there's life-sucking activities. Mm-hmm. And you may see, based on how you're spending your downtime, that you're doing a lot of life-giving, and chances are you have a very healthy, or very positive mental health, versus life-sucking activities, and it's continuing to get worse over time. Some of these life-giving activities simply stated, and I wish I could do a guided meditation with the group today, because this has been a game changer for me. Again, going all the way back to a young kid in New York City, growing up with a single mom and feeling those stresses of being poor and not well fed, not well clothed. Practicing meditation has been an anchor for me. And so meditation doesn't necessarily need to be sitting for 30 minutes. Mm-hmm. It could be taking a walk and just bringing some awareness to your breath and feeling the thoughts come in and then having the thoughts leave. So just kind of being an observer, a third-party observer to your breath and to the influx of your thoughts in and out. That simple act of getting up and taking a walk and using that as a form of meditation, that is an extremely healthy way to spend downtime.
I want to pose a question, Ian, to those who are watching. Sure. If you have any ways that you meditate each day, especially since a good chunk of us are still kind of working at home. And I know some of us who are on the call might be actually in the office in a hybrid kind of way. So if you could go ahead, share in the chat some of the ways that you meditate, that you take time for yourself and you give yourself that self-awareness, I think that would be really great as we continue on with the presentation today. Yeah, that's great. And on that note, someone from work shared with me, they said, what I like to do is just count my breaths, so one exercise is deep breath in, up to 3, hold it for 3,
exhale for 3. And then in that process, 3 breaths at 3 seconds each. In that process, think about something that brings you peace. It could be a memory, right? Childhood memory, or maybe a memory of your wedding. Maybe it's that promotion. Maybe a place, a place you go that feels safe and secure and nurturing. Ocean, nature. These are places often that are brought to mind. Maybe it's a person that makes you feel at peace, or possibly a routine or a habit. Like when I'm at my best self and I'm eating well and I feel prepared, like just that feeling of preparedness. Maybe it's a process, that you can make it in Zen meditation. They call this single pointed meditation. So you can take that place, thing, memory that brings you peace and make it the single point of your meditation. Any responses in chat?
No, I think people might be meditating. So, but nothing yet. No one has mentioned anything yet. So I'm hoping people can go ahead and share some of that, because I think it'll be useful to literally everyone trying to figure out which ways that they can meditate. Because some people don't have, want some ideas on how to do that, especially if you're back in the office, and what that can look like as well for you.
Yep. Yeah, there's obviously a number of apps, right, that can help with this. Breathe, Calm, a couple that come to mind that I've used that can assist. And what's cool about those apps is that you can use them in the office, right, at your office chair, or even, lay down at night and do them, or first thing in the morning, depending on where it fits your routine. But they have specific curriculum that can take the premise of meditation, not only for mental health, but weight loss, managing stress and anxiety at work, a number of kind of key outcomes as part of that process. So you asked a question earlier. You said, what can we do? And my response was to carve boundaries and think of this in terms of self-care. So how do we do self-care, right? This is of staff and people who I like, friends and family who I talk about this with a lot. They say that carving time for themselves is the number one challenge facing them in terms of having a positive mental health or healthy mindset. And so here again are some very simple, low entry ways for self-care: setting boundaries. Staying at home. Maybe the opposite of that is now going to the office. Saying no. Asking for what you need. I love that. I love that. Spending time alone. Add to that. Spending time alone with family in nature, at the beach. Asking for help. Right. The stigma of asking for help. Oh, my boss, I don't want to bother them. She's way too busy. She's always in a hurry. And yeah, get over that, right? Think of it as an exercise in self-care, where you're going to ask your boss for help. Taking a step back, thinking win-win, as you mentioned, and forgiving yourself. Raise your hand if you have a hard time forgiving yourself. Yeah.
And I someone did mention in the chat, or Rebecca mentioned how she goes hiking and tries to sneak one in and all of that, or just does neighborhood walks, or a morning crossword. Mine is oddly enough listening to the news in the morning with the cup, with the flat white. That's kind of like the way that I like to kind of start my day.
It's like your routine.
But yeah, that's, and then Amy mentioned how she loves to walk without music, without no podcast, just a quiet walk outside of the city.
And again, it's, I think, important to ask in terms of life-sucking or life-giving activities, where are you spending your downtime? That downtime, that short walk, or the moment there in the morning, listening to the news with your flat white. To me, that seems like a very healthy exercise in how you're spending your downtime and getting ready for being on stage, for being up and being on call.
Does the coffee always work? Not really, but
yeah, that's what the second cup is for. Oh, that's funny. On this, just to throw a personal anecdote in the mix, what have been doing a lot is going for you remember that back in my day, we used to go on Sunday drives. I call it screen time. It's my time looking out the windshields. It's my screen time where I get to just decompress. And so I'll just go for a drive, let myself be with my thoughts in quiet, nothing playing, just looking at the open road. And that brings me a lot of self-care. This is one of my forms of self-care.
Oh, Denise mentioned that she takes a stand-up paddleboarding. Oh, wait, hold on. Yeah, stand-up paddleboarding last year in May as a part of an outlet and a new interest, which is pretty cool. I have not done that, but maybe something I'll be interested in. So
open water.
She's
speaking my language. I love that.
Yeah, when you're on in the Pacific Northwest, you have all those beautiful things to do. So
that's right. That's right. Another way for self-care is to figure out your self-love language. We've heard about love languages. How about self-love languages? Treat yourself to a massage, soft blanket, right? These are all the physical love languages. Quality time with friends, family, calling up, someone close to you haven't talked to in a while, spending quality time on the phone, giving or receiving gifts, acts of service. Like for me, this is a way that I'm expressing my self-love, is to prepare this presentation and be here as an act of service to this community of higher ed professionals. And then words of affirmation. As silly and cheesy as this scene, we've all seen like the sitcoms or maybe the movie clips where like, I'm good enough, I can do it. Or the little engine that could, I think I can. Words of affirmation are surprisingly very, very powerful. And so a short exercise I wanted to also provide is called the Yay Me exercise. Peleg Top, he's the one of my spiritual advisors, gave me this exercise. It was on an annual retreat that we did. And I do this during major milestones. So in the beginning of the year, end of the year, closing it out. I also do it in smaller situations like opening a classroom or maybe opening a meeting, like a departmental meeting. You can run this Yay Me exercise. And I absolutely love this in terms of self-love and building some positive affirmations for not only yourself, but for the group. So here it is. If anybody wants to do it now, think of some accomplishments, small wins, a couple things you're particularly proud of, maybe in the last week, or if you want to go bigger than that, think about the last year, especially in all the turmoil and the crisis that we've been through. Think of those accomplishments, write down, like brainstorm as many as you can, edit, add more, and then share. Yay me for coming to this presentation today and participating to making myself better suited for my job and my mental health. Yay me for walking right past that box of donuts and not picking up one of those donuts. Yay me, right? It can go on and you just share and it can become infectious. I really, really love this activity and I hope people will take this and run with it. Maybe they want to put a yay me in the chat or two. I'd also like to hear that.
I love picking up a donut. I mean, I don't do it often, but when I do, it's a nice moment of joy.
What's one of your yay me's for this year, Kevin?
Yay me for this year is actually planning travel again. For those especially who do international travel as part of work, which I currently don't do that in the same way anymore, but I love doing it for pleasure, and I'm really looking forward to actually getting out of the US and really, truly relaxing. That's always
awesome.
been my place. That's a yay me in my regard. And I know not everyone
I love that.
Do that, but we all have these little things that I know that we can do. We have only about a couple minutes left. So I'm hoping to see if there are any kind of, we got a few yay me's that came up in the chat as well. Surviving the pandemic, that is great.
It's a major one.
Are there any questions that you would like answered or that you have that you would like to know more about some of the things that Ian brought up today from anyone? Please put them in as we have a few minutes left.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as those are percolating, is it okay if I just click through the rest here so we feel like we have a sense of finality?
Yes.
Couple other places to kind of hack your way to mental health is grounding exercises. This is one, it's in the slide deck, we won't go through, but in those moments, the tense saber-toothed tiger moments, you can acknowledge 5 things that you see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing that you can taste. There's also this great story from Sasaki Roshi. He was a Zen Buddhist teacher that I studied with for many years, lived to 104, and he recounted this ancient Zen story of a king of Japan who was struggling with mental health, taxes, conspiracy, war, and someone from his community, a plebeian, low-class citizen, came to him, gave him a stone. Some people say it was a ring, but he said, anytime, this is the secret to mental health, put this stone in your pocket, and anytime you feel like you can't go on and you have incredible anxiety, touch that stone and remind yourself that this too shall pass. Mm-hmm. So just that, and anybody that wears a ring, you can touch that in those moments, do it privately and just say to yourself, this too shall pass. Mm-hmm. Last year, a dear colleague of mine, she had lost her mother. She had also, to death in the family, come down with coronavirus. She had coronavirus. She was trying to make a difficult departure from a toxic work environment. And I asked her, how is she doing? And she said, I'll never forget it. And it's worthy of this slide. I'm staying grounded in gratitude. So just giving thanks, right? Acknowledging the things you get to do, not the things you have to do. I have to do this. I have to send this email. I have to do that. I have to show up for class. Reframing that as things you get to do. There's a lot of science behind the benefits of gratitude. Mm-hmm. One of my clients says he has a painting in his office and he just expresses gratitude for the art and the creativity in that painting. Mm-hmm. I have a photo of my family and give thanks for them, not only them, but what they've taught me. This might be counterintuitive, Kevin, but think about that saber-toothed boss that we were referring to. Give thanks to them.
Yeah, and people
what
have...
What lesson are they trying to teach you?
Mm-hmm. You do learn a lot from those saber-toothed boss, the gorillas, all of them. You do learn from them. And some people actually have some questions regarding that. Okay. Robert had asked, I know this is going to be pretty brief because we are short on time, but Robert had asked, how can universities prioritize both their people and their quote unquote business? But I think kind of related to that, Rebecca has asked, what do you do if people, bosses, coworkers, et cetera, push back when you draw boundaries?
Yeah, those are good questions. So how do you find the balance? I think we're all grappling with that. Building it into your organization's culture is key. So assigning wellness as a value, that will create culture. That will create the balance that you're looking for. And what was the second question?
And the second one, what do you do if people, bosses, coworkers, et cetera, push back when you start to draw boundaries?
Yeah. Well, it might come to the point where it is fight or flight. Ultimately, it could be a survival situation, right? If that situation gets to the point where you need to leave, and I'm not advocating that everybody go and quit tomorrow, but you'll know if you're in a toxic environment and if it's time to go. There's like the 90% rule. If you've given yourself 90% and you feel like you've gotten in return 90% of what the company or organization or institution can give to you, chances are it's time to move on. And so those conflicts might be an indication that you've both put in 90% and you're kind of bickering over that last bit.
Thanks for listening to the Higher Ed Happy Hour podcast. For more higher ed specific resources, or if you'd like to be a guest on the show, please visit unincorporated.com.